So, hey, thanks again for having me today. I'm happy to be here to talk about VMware security and our focus on zero trust. I'm also joined, there's a couple of other panelists from VMware, my peer, our SE leader for the region, Sam Lee, our partner business manager, Cedric Tan, as well as Yi-Sin Liu, who's our sales specialist covering the Philippines. So if you've got any questions that come to mind throughout the session, feel free to pop them into the Q&A. And we'll get to those promptly. And if there's any questions remaining, I'm happy to address them at the end of my session. Cool. So getting into it, as the previous Fortinet presenter shared, zero trust means that you assume you've been breached. Malicious actors are in your network. They're actively identifying targets and waiting for the right time to make their move. So the way that things have kind of been traditionally in the IT world, users primarily connected from an office, or a smaller subset of users would have worked remotely. In the data center, very traditional web app and database, the three-tier model that we all know and love, and that's been around for a long, long time. And that was quite, static, both in terms of kind of its configuration and operation. Stability was absolutely critical. As that has evolved, we've seen a huge amount of modernization, particularly over the last number of years via containers. And this helps to make those applications a lot more dynamic and scalable. Now, with this modernization, there's also a huge amount more need for workload identity, protection, segmentation, compliance needs, visibility across everything that's happening, as well as a lot of API-driven communication between the apps. Now, again, a huge amount of the apps, as they modernized, they started shifting to the cloud. And all of those needs, those same kind of identification, segmentation, visibility needs, they, effectively, doubled, tripled, quadrupled in some instances, depending on the number of cloud providers that customers were using, such as obviously AWS, Azure, GCP, but also, potentially hybrid or even private cloud environments. And of course, the pandemic very much accelerated the remote workforce. And as we say, working from home, it is the new normal. We're likely to see much more of a kind of hybrid workplace, workforce evolve, and we're seeing it today already. Some organizations, are a little bit more resistant to it. Some of the financial institutions in the US in particular have been in the news over the last kind of 6 to 12 months in terms of what they're expecting of their employees. And just within the last week, Elon Musk in the headlines again, where he's strongly encouraging his employees to work from home, to work from the office, get out of their houses and get back into the office. So the trusted perimeter, or the concept of the trusted perimeter, if it ever really existed, has very much dissolved. And as a result, we've seen a drastic increase in organizational attack surfaces. So just the amount of services, applications, devices that are now potentially being exposed to attackers. So in order to protect this expanded attack surface, you really need an adequate level of visibility and control across these workloads, devices, users, and networks, both to prevent, detect, and respond from any emerging threats. Now, VMware's approach to security, we are not trying to be all things to all people. We're trying to focus on what are our intrinsic advantages. And what we mean by that is we know where we have strengths, and it's these four boxes, and those are the areas that we're going to focus on. And so areas that we're not going to focus on as a result would be things like email security or identity. And that's where we'll be building out a strong ecosystem with some of the leading vendors in those spaces. Now, some of the stats here will be very surprising to a number of you. So VMware Security today has over 30,000 customers globally. So we have a huge security business, and we secure 99 out of the Fortune 100 organizations. And just the one other stat that I draw your attention to, we're actually one of the top 5 largest firewall vendors in the world. And that's quite surprising to a lot of individuals when I highlight it to them. But we have a huge install base of NSX delivering software firewalling. And we've a lot of large deployments there amongst a very strong and loyal customer base. Now, some of these stats are probably familiar, but we've noticed an increase in the last kind of year or two in destructive attacks in particular. And what we mean by those is attackers are no longer, effectively trying to break into your house and steal your most sensitive information. What they're doing now is they're still breaking into your house. They're still stealing some of your most sensitive information, but then they're effectively setting your house on fire on the way out. And how we see this operating is with double extortion as well. So a lot of the time, before the attackers have even started to encrypt your information, they've already exfiltrated it and are trying to sell it on secondary markets. So we've seen a huge increase in that. And what that kind of goes to prove is that, if your most sensitive information is encrypted in a ransomware attack, paying the ransom may not actually reduce the scope of the damage. So you need to be sensitive to what else those attackers might do with the information. But when we look at this kind of evolving landscape, again, it's just making that kind of traditional enterprise architecture and the investments that go along with it much less effective. Now, how have we kind of traditionally tried to address this attack surface? So we've got a network monitoring station where we've got maybe some taps, or we're collecting some telemetry from elsewhere in the environment, kind of with the goal that anything usual would trigger an alert in that network monitoring station. But if attackers are able to evade kind of initial detection and make it on to a host or a server, in this case, a Linux box, escalate their privileges by a lateral movement, then moving on to a Windows host. If they're able to establish a DNS connection outbound, this can potentially allow them to set up a command and control session and ultimately gain persistence. So as we're seeing environments becoming more and more complex, more difficult to defend, there are more opportunities for attackers to gain a foothold such as this. So, the world that we're trying to protect, as I've kind of laid out, has fundamentally changed and become far more complex. So driven by that app modernization, as well as multi-cloud infrastructure and work from home becoming the new norm. The traditional approach for security with more and more bolted on solutions is clearly not working. And it's simply creating more operational complexity. You cannot, cut and paste yesterday's solutions onto today's paradigms. A different approach is needed. And this approach should be distributed with cloud scale and operationally easy. So what are VMware doing that's unique? So we're approaching zero trust through a combination of secure user access and secure workload access. Our strategy consists of these three broad pillars: multi-cloud security, modern app security, and the anywhere workspace. SOC, the Security Operations Center, plays a crucial role as it cuts across all three of these to drive security efficacy. And we see the opportunity in the future to stitch these things together to have the ability to look across both the network and the endpoint. And that's the principle behind what the security industry has framed as XDR, to see things that other people simply cannot. Now, detection and response is not yet solved. Significant gaps remain. I've mentioned visibility already, as well as the inability of a lot of existing solutions to detect evolving threats. But a crucial point is incomplete information, incomplete context, which in turn inhibits SOC operators and means that instead of providing rich telemetry that allows them to make a decision very, very quickly, is this the kind of traffic I need to block or allow? They're digging through different consoles, different tools, trying to figure it out themselves. So we're very focused on security operators and how we can make their roles, their lives, if you will, that little bit easier. So if you kind of put yourself into the shoes of an XDR kind of buyer today, we think that there are two kind of choices, both of which are sort of suboptimal: proprietary versus SIEM. So I'm going to just share a little bit on what we see as the pros and cons of each of these. Native options are very tightly aligned with other security tools in a vendor's portfolio. Now, they are often much more seamlessly integrated with a more straightforward buying process. However, all of the offerings in a native solution may not be best of breed. And this is where we're talking from endpoint, network, cloud, or even email and other capabilities. Some of these control points are often subpar, and that can be a tough ask for a security decision maker to decide upon. And when we talk about vendor lock-in, that's another issue that a lot of end users are concerned about. But also, when you look at this from an end-to-end perspective with multiple different products and solutions, it's very rarely aligned with how enterprises allocate budget or purchase software or hardware today. On the other side, SIEM options, they're frequently already well integrated with a lot of security tools and controls, and are good for collecting data and are obviously built for vast log collection. The downsides: detection can be difficult, primarily because of insufficient, incomplete, and or unpredictable data sets. So the operators of the SIEM are effectively forced to live with the types of data and telemetry that you can get from the other vendor solutions deployed in your environment. VMware's approach, we're trying to marry the best of these together, and we're calling it ecosystem XDR. Now, no vendor lock-in. It will allow organizations to mix and match the best controls from leading vendors, and as a result, provides better value with no need to do any broad rip and replace across your environment. There are still downsides. You would still be dealing with multiple vendors, and again, you don't have that single hand to shake or the single throat to choke. But we think that the value that's delivered would mitigate these downsides. So now if we kind of go back to that example I gave in terms of the network tap and the monitoring station, how do we expand across that? And by combining Carbon Black's EDR with our NSX and last line NDR, we can see very rich telemetry from additional locations. With every additional location, with every additional piece of telemetry, it allows us to be more confident in the decisions that we make. So when an analyst or an operator receives an alert within the Carbon Black cloud, they know it's a high fidelity alert that should be actioned immediately. Now, we receive terabytes of data, of endpoint data, every single day. And it comprises of billions of security events, billions of network flows, and thousands of network signatures delivered by NSX. The result is comprehensive telemetry today, but with the potential for even more context with our future integrations with new third-party sources as part of our ecosystem XDR strategy. And those are those best-in-class vendors that I mentioned earlier, where we're going to focus on what our intrinsic strengths are, and we're going to partner with the strongest vendors in other areas to provide our joint customers with the best offerings in the market. So our advanced threat protection consists of 4 key components. First, I've mentioned NSX already. It provides intrusion detection and prevention that uses highly accurate signatures, but these signatures are also tailored to the applications that we protect. So this allows us to effectively protect applications against a very wide range of both known attacks, unknown attacks, and exploits. Secondly, we have a network sandbox via our last line acquisition. And here we use a combination of static and dynamic malware analysis techniques to identify both known as well as previously unknown malware programs and malicious documents. And thirdly, with our network traffic analytics, we use that to identify unwanted network behavior. So this is where there may not necessarily be any malware involved. It allows us to detect threat actors that attempt to break into a network, move laterally, and exfiltrate stolen information. And potentially they've leveraged valid login credentials to go about their activities. So again, there's no malicious signature. What we're looking at there is the behavior of the individual, comparing it with the sort of behavior we've seen from them in the past, and trying to identify any deviation from that baseline. And then lastly, the network sandbox, the IDS, the network sandbox, and the network traffic analytics, they all produce alerts that are related to individual hosts. The network detection and response pulls these alerts together, aggregating them across those multiple assets, and provides a security analyst with that single high-level picture of all ongoing intrusions that I mentioned. So let's click into these in a little bit more detail. So as I said, we're focused on the SOC operators. How do we make their life easier? So we're delivering only the highest confidence detections. So when we say something's bad, it's bad. You better have a look at it very quickly. We do this through the precise combination of world-class threat research from the human expertise we offer via the VMware Threat Analytics Unit. So that's our TAO team. And we marry that together with powerful AI analytics to stop attackers. So we're trying to strike this balance of humans and technology for the most holistic approach for turning that very rich telemetry into insight, which can then be quickly converted into action. And this means that more attacks can be stopped and we minimize the time to detect and in turn the time to respond, so allowing you to be more effective. On the human side of things on the left, our TAO team is made up of over 30 data scientists and PhDs, and we also have hundreds of threat researchers and partners, including some of the most published cybersecurity researchers in academia today. So very, very rich insights that they're providing into our telemetry. And on the technology side of things, the combined value of Carbon Black and NSX takes us beyond the endpoint for a whole that's much more than the sum of its parts. And we're leveraging customers' own security data along with our data from across our customer base to deliver powerful insights that are both timely and actionable. Very, very important. But look, it's all well and good for me to be saying it. And obviously you should take what pretty much every vendor says with a little bit of a pinch of salt. But you don't just have to take our word for it. Here are some proof points from the industry itself to show that we really are delivering the highest confidence detections for the most sophisticated real-world attacks out there. We tested NSX NDR against the top threats from the MITRE evaluations, and we scored 100% on network visibility with 0 false positives. So it's very important. And we're combining those capabilities with the already very strong capabilities we have in the Carbon Black Cloud. And when it comes to prevention, this has been an area where we've been building out our next-gen antivirus capability on the endpoint. In 2021, we received a perfect usability score from AV Test, and that's their measure of false positives. And we received that perfect usability score in every single month of testing last year, so throughout the whole of 2021. And we're committed to continuously engaging with these leading testing organizations such as AV Test and MITRE to provide end user organizations with the data, the objective data that they need to make good decisions about which vendors and which solutions they choose to procure. So going back to the SOC again, what they need are really tools to respond not just rapidly, but in a graduated way. So where they can take different levels of action. It could be, a simple quiet notification to the back end via, a log or an email, something to a console. There could be a triggered prevention as you move up the chain in terms of the severity of these actions. You could do things like automatic host isolation, or if it's a very high severity and a high fidelity alert, you could potentially even suspend a virtual machine with business critical context. Now, you're not going to make such strong decisions right off the bat, and you're certainly not going to make them without good context and good confidence that you're not going to get in trouble by taking that action. A graduated response lets you more precisely target the adversary without bringing down the whole organization, or more importantly, bringing critical business applications to a grinding halt. So the response also needs to be automated as much as possible. We need to leverage our control points at the endpoint and beyond through those ecosystem partners. So again, whether it's response actions through Workspace ONE or out of the box playbook from our SOAR partners, we're really trying to give SOCs the tools that they need to take action at scale and to do so rapidly from anywhere in the world. And this connection across control points, what the security industry has framed as XDR, we see this as critical to our vision. XDR kind of evolved out of the endpoint, but we see its fundamentals as being the endpoint and the network. And these are two of the most challenging places in the enterprise to gain visibility. But they're powerful. And when they're integrated, and we can measure the power of that integration, leveraging some of the frameworks that exist today. So this is an area that VMware are investing in heavily, working on. And we're going to make some very interesting announcements over the next couple of days at the RSA conference in San Francisco as well. So kind of moving on into the pillars, when we look at secure workload access, when we talk about securing workloads, it's important to kind of change your mindset a little bit, where we can be very threat focused, particularly when we're used to addressing security threats at the endpoint. But when we talk about securing workloads, we're defending not just against malware, both known and unknown, but it's also important to defend against misconfigurations, which have frequently been credited as the source of numerous breaches. And obviously the threat from malicious insiders doesn't go away whether or not your workload is deployed on-prem or in a cloud environment. Full workload protection, it really starts with securing the application itself. And we've spent a significant amount of time and effort over the last couple of years since VMware acquired Carbon Black, integrating Carbon Black and all of its security capabilities directly into vSphere. Those capabilities including next-gen antivirus, endpoint detection and response EDR, threat intelligence, as well as numerous other capabilities. We're also hyper-focused on making it easy to deploy, manage, and operate as one agent. Not a dozen agents or 2 dozen, one single agent, which can be attached at point of workload creation with one click, meaning that your workloads are born secure. And it is simply with one click that you can attach Carbon Black to those workloads. So we make it as easy as possible. Next, we secure the web applications and API calls from malicious attackers and bots originating from the internet. Our software-based Elastic Advanced Load Balancer AVI with Web Application Firewall makes it significantly easier to protect the web apps. And it has all of the modern defenses that you'd expect built into it. Now, when we look at a lot of sort of traditional environments today, let's kind of start with what's currently happening. We've got all of these security capabilities that have historically lived in the perimeter. So, your network traffic analysis, your sandboxing, intrusion detection and prevention systems, firewalls, and depending on the size and complexity of the organization, you could have multiple tiers of firewall, multiple tiers of IDS and IPS. So in my experience, I've frequently seen organizations where just these capabilities alone could take up an entire rack of equipment in a corporate data center. So, what I suppose is kind of going on here in terms of their evolution. Now, the issue with a lot of these capabilities being deployed, again, traditionally as appliances at the perimeter, is that they're only seeing traffic coming in and out. And a lot of organizations are trying to use these traditional capabilities by extending them inside. But that doesn't really work because you've all this traffic, you create congestion, complexity, and ultimately blind spots. So what VMware have been working on for many, many years is taking all of these capabilities and natively building them into vSphere so that you can seamlessly deploy them when you're creating your workloads. The result is a much simpler and easier to operate environment. And another benefit is massively increased throughput without the complexity of hairpinning traffic with very high-end firewall appliances, for example. And again, because this is in software, we don't need any underlying changes to the physical network. Once it's there, and you can operate your entire data center environment from VMware. Now, moving into segmentation. Segmentation blocks the obvious. Think of it almost as the initial level of policy for how your environment is going to operate. Simple things like your dev environment not being able to access your production environment. Micro-segmentation just takes it down, kind of as the name suggests, to a smaller level of segmentation where potentially each individual application has its own boundary. So again, only specific applications can talk to other resources based on your network and security policy. So you can define, the source and destination IP subnets, the VLANs, and the specific ports that communication is allowed on. It's important to couple this with inspection via intrusion detection and prevention solutions. Ransomware, as I mentioned earlier, frequently uses stolen credentials. So, if you're looking for any malicious traffic, you won't necessarily find it. We find that upwards of 77% of the time, ransomware uses legitimate channels like RDP and SMB. So it's important to inspect all of the flows, not just those that you suspect are potentially bad. And then thirdly, it's important to do this on a per hop basis, not just looking at communication between two specific resources. And again, because this is all software delivered, there's no need for any expensive hardware taps in your data center or in any of your branches. Now, because this is deployed with the workload, we see every packet going in and out of that application or in and out of that network resource. And did I mention SE Labs already? I did, but just to remind you, we are the first and only vendor to have received a AAA rating for our network detection and response capabilities from SE Labs. Now, with operationalization, say that 3 times really quickly, operationalization, there are a few more things that I wanted to touch on. When a new workload comes up, it automatically inherits the policies. And that's security as well as any other policy that you describe. If the workload retires, the policy retires with it. And if it moves, the policies move with it, with no dropped connections. Very, very important. And we take a single path to apply all of the security that we've been talking about. Now, typically, perimeter firewalls can end up having thousands and even hundreds of thousands of rules. Most of them scale from previous operators, and there's no business context attached to those rules. So it's very difficult to understand if they're required or not. With the automation that I've just shared, we found that customers see massive reduction in the number of rules they have to manage on the firewall, up to 90%. but also up to a 73% reduction in the OPEX required. And that's, both on the human operator side as well as on the technology side, which is important given how challenging it is to recruit for security positions, across pretty much every role in the industry. And then just one thing that I wanted to touch on, and I know I saw a Q&A from the previous session on this as well. Response and remediation in case something does go wrong, like in the case of ransomware. So with VMware Cloud Disaster Recovery, we automatically take snapshots, and we can store store backups that are air gapped from the production environment, but also making it very, very easy to restore from that backup in case of an incident. So now moving into how we secure modern applications. With a cloud native application, you cannot and should not just take legacy firewall policies and transpose them into the container world. That legacy approach was very much built around physical interconnect. And now we're not dealing with those same rigid 3 tiers of the web application and database anymore, but with hundreds, or in some cases, even thousands of microservices. And all of these little services are turning on and linking up and down all of the time, sometimes just over a matter of seconds. We can't just kind of stick a firewall on the microservice and be done with it. So cloud native apps have a microservices architecture and are primarily containerized. Attackers are beginning to target these apps. They've been targeting them for quite a while already. So they need to be secured, but with a very specific set of capabilities. And at VMware, we have capabilities, very strong capabilities that secure these modern apps through their entire life cycle, spanning from build through to deploy, run, and the manage phase. Our platforms allow you to shift security left, moving it much more early into the development phase so that vulnerabilities and security issues can be minimized as the apps get deployed into production. So let's have a look at how that kind of works in a little bit more detail. So, when we're up and running, we can put basic guardrails around an environment, kind of like those segmentation capabilities I mentioned with NSX. But, simple things, development can't connect to the internet, but production can, for example. We can provide end-to-end encryption through the Tanzu service mesh. And more APIs are looking like the new endpoint. API gateways act like a firewall that you would put on a north-south API. But again, there can potentially be hundreds or even thousands of these internal APIs, making them highly complex to protect. So just like we provide east-west protection, we can now automatically secure these APIs, providing north-south protection. And our latest service mesh allows you to see how these APIs are being used and allows you to identify anomalies. And in the future, we'll be doing a lot more work on anomaly detection across containers. And then we can use the Tanzu service mesh and Antria for interconnecting these workloads, providing the equivalent of microsegmentation and isolation, not just within your own environment, but across multiple different cloud environments, both public and private. So where we really shine here is with NSX. So we can stitch together these policies to provide unified management across all of these different environments. And that's something that no other container-based security vendor can do today. And thirdly, the third and final piece of the VMware security pillars, it's the Anywhere Workspace. And a lot of the fundamental technology here, it originated from VMware's acquisition of AirWatch many years ago, as well as our Horizon solution. So this is very much focusing on those remote workers or hybrid working, because as I said, that's here to stay. So what we've done at VMware to help with these remote workers is we've taken the services that used to be in the DMZ and we've distributed them in 150 POPs around the world. So if we take a look inside one of these POPs, you have, all of these different capabilities in there: connectivity with SD-WAN, network access capabilities, and of course all of the security capabilities. But also our AI ops. So this is quite interesting, where we not only automatically discover problems that are happening, but we can fix them. And what that means is, if you're on a Zoom session and it starts to degrade in terms of the quality of the audio or the video, you're not necessarily going to even know it, because the system will catch it and shift the packets onto a different path to make sure that the performance is maintained. So just one of the many powerful capabilities that we have within this service. And then, just in addition to networking and security services at the distributed edge, we also are able to provide edge computing for particularly suitable for those applications that are very sensitive to latency. And obviously Carbon Black, very, very close to my heart, addressing requirements both at the endpoint as well as at the workload. Carbon Black provides very, very rich telemetry from every endpoint that it's deployed upon, giving those SOC teams very granular controls to identify risk, prevent, detect, and respond to sophisticated threats with ease. The telemetry that we collect a just much more comprehensive and detailed telemetry than any other vendor in this space, and we've been recognized for that since effectively the creation of Carbon Black. But that telemetry and then the threat intel that we can apply to it provide a very complete, context-rich picture of exactly what's going on at the endpoint and workload. Really leaving attackers nowhere to hide. It's no surprise that most of the leading incident response organizations in the world rely on Carbon Black as their tool of choice when they're called in to investigate a breach or a ransomware attack. And we also offer a native managed detection and response service, which provides, an extra set of eyes for those organizations that need a 24/7 capability. And then we can also just take what we know about the riskiness of a host and use that insight to make better security decisions for the broader environment. And just lastly, we've also enabled zero trust network access for users accessing apps from anywhere by putting access controls within our POPs. And that includes both identity integration and federation. And I can speak to both the power as well as the simplicity and powerful user experience of that, where I access all of my applications through Workspace ONE. And once I've authenticated against Workspace ONE, I don't need to authenticate subsequently against additional apps. So I'm no longer spending a couple of hours a week inputting usernames and passwords and repeatedly acknowledging multi-factor authentication prompts. So that's it. Those are the three pillars of how VMware is approaching zero trust. And with that, what are we left with? Effective security that's both easier to operate and delivered through a software and virtualization layer. Highly effective, and frankly, I believe we're only getting started in terms of showcasing VMware security capability to the industry. So with that, thank you all very much for your time and attention. I appreciate it greatly, and I'll pass back to our host in case we've got any questions.